Hello, this is Miss Oliva, and I'm going to go over the problems from 8.2, which is about solving equations with three variables. So this is going to use the methods we just went over in 8.1 with elimination or substitution. So we have these three different problems with three variables. So what we want to do first is get rid of one variable in two different equations so that then we can kind of treat it exactly like we did in last section. So if I notice right off the bat, there's a -2 and a +2z, I'm going to start by combining those two equations to get rid of z, and then I'll figure out how to do it with the other one. So I'm going to add a and c together. And I don't need to multiply them by anything because I already have the plus and minus 2. So all I need to do is add them together. So this gives me -x plus y. These are gone. And this would add up to 7. So I now have one equation with just an x and a y. So now I'm going to do it again, combine two other equations and get to this point so then I can solve for x and y. So if I want to eliminate z from b and z, so these two equations, I would do that by first multiplying c by 3, because then I'd have the -6 and the +6. So now I'm going to do that. So b can stay as is, but I'm going to multiply c by 3 before I add them together. So this would give me -19x minus 13y. These would be gone, equaling -27. Okay, so now if I want to combine these two, I'm going to multiply d by, so they're calling this d and this e. I'm going to multiply d by, let's say, 13, so that then I can combine these. So if I multiply that by 13, I get here and then if I leave this one as is, you can see that the y's are gonna go away. So -13 plus -19 is -32, and 91 plus -27 is 64. If I divide by the -32, x equals -2. So I have x. Now I can go back to any of the equations that only had x and y. So I'm going to go all the way back to this one. And I'm going to plug in -2. So a -2 makes it +2. Subtract the 2 and I get 5. And so now I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning and plug in my x and my y and solve for z. So I'm just going to go to the very first equation, the way it started up here. So 4 times x, but x is -2, plus 5 times y, which is 5, minus 2 times z equals 25. So combining these gets me 17. I subtract the 17 and I get 8. And then divide by -2 and I get -4. So my solution set at the end, I'll put it in order from X to Y to Z. So -2, 5, -4. Oops, this should be a parenthesis. Okay, so that's the key. It's kind of combining two of these at a time so you get down to just two equations that have two variables, and then you can go from there. All right, if this was the problem I was trying to solve, I can see that this top equation doesn't have any z's, and the next two have opposites. So I'm going to combine these two first just by adding them. So that would give me 5x plus 3y. The z's would go away, and I'd have -18. So now I have two equations already with two variables. So now I can combine those. So I'm going to bring this one down here and add those together. And this is a special case because the x's and the y's go away. So I need to see what happens over here to decide if it's no solution or infinitely many solutions. And this one is going to be no solution because these do not match. Okay, so even with these, sometimes you'll get the special cases. Okay, word problem. So they're gonna have to give me a lot of information so that I can set up three different equations. Because if you're gonna have three variables, you're gonna need three equations. So Devin invested $5,000 in three mutual funds. So we're just gonna call the three different funds X, Y, and Z. And it said here that the total that we invested in all three of these accounts is 5,000. So that's one of my equations. A fund containing large cap stocks, so we'll just consider that X, made this much in returns for a year. A real estate fund, so we'll call that Y, lost this much. And a bond fund, so we'll call that Z, made this much. The amount invested in the large cap stocks, so remember we're calling that X, was twice the amount invested in the real estate fund. So that's Y. So I'm actually going to do that equation next because that one's simple. So however much I invested in this fund was equal to twice what I invested in that fund. So that's just a nice simple equation right there. But then my last equation needs to involve all those percents and the fact that he had a net return of $133 across all of them. So that means that's the total amount he got back. So now we just have to set up an equation that would figure out how much he got back. So we invested X amount in that first fund, and that first fund made 7.9% return. So if I do 0.079 times X, that would find how much money I got back from that one. The next one lost money, so it's going to need to be a minus 13.7%, which means 0.137 times Y. And then the last one made 5.6%, so 0.056 times Z. Okay, so before I solve these, I can do one nice thing with this one to kind of get rid of all these decimals. Since I have 3 decimal places in all of these numbers, if I multiply by 1,000, it would move the decimal 3 spots and they'd be gone. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to multiply this by 1,000 just to get rid of the decimals. So that would make this 79x minus 137y plus 56z equals 133,000. Okay. Since I have this nice simple equation here where it says that x is equal to 2y, I'm going to start with that and substitute 2y in for x in my other equations, because then that would eliminate the x and I'd only have y and z. So if I go from equation 1 and substitute in 2y instead of the x, I'd have this, and I can even go one step further and combine the y's. So here's now my first equation. If I do the same thing with the last equation and plug in 2y for x, and then reduce this as much as I can, I will get 79 times 2 is 158, and I'm going to go ahead and subtract the 137. So that gives me 21y plus 56z equals that 133,000. So now I want to combine these two equations. So I'm going to multiply this one by -7 so that I can have the -21 and the +21. So that gives me -21y minus 7z equals -35,000. And now I'm going to put the other equation as is underneath it and add them together. So the y's are going to go, and I will have 49z equaling 98,000. Divide by z, so divide by the 49, and I get 2,000. So that would mean I put $2,000 in that fund, Z, which is the bond fund. So now I can go back into one of my equations when I only had the two variables. So the 3y plus z equals 5,000 is a nice place to just go plug that 2,000 in. So I'm going to subtract the 2,000 and divide by 3. So that means I put 1,000 in the second fund, which was the real estate fund. Okay? And then now to find my last amount, I can go back to the very first equation that was the fact that x plus y plus z equals 5,000. So if I know that y is 1,000 and z is 2,000, I really get 3,000. And if I subtract the 3,000, I get 2,000 for x. So my answers would be 2,000, 1,000, and 2,000. Okay. And I think that is it for 8.2. Let me know if you have any questions as you work through this homework.